this chapel. A no-name, the pastor isn't even there, a no-name layman stands up, takes Isaiah 45:22, look to me, all the ends of the earth, and be saved. He says it over and over again, 20 times. Spurgeon says he's so stupid he doesn't have anything to say but the Scriptures. And God, that's what Spurgeon calls him, stupid. And then God saves Charles Spurgeon. And he never even finds out who the man is. That's exactly the way it happened with John Owen. He's on his way to hear Edmund Calamy at St. Mary's Church, Aldermanbury, with his cousin, because this is a great preacher in those days, evidently. I'd never heard of him. And he's not there. Calamy didn't show up. And his cousin says, let's go down the street to, I forget what other big-name church. And Owen, for some reason, says, let's not. Let's just stay. And a simple preacher took the text, Matthew 8:26, why are you fearful, O you of little faith? And it was God's appointed word and appointed time. And there was, like Wesley says, a strange warming. And all of his doubts vanished. All of his fears disappeared. He had the assurance that he was born of God, and that stamped the rest of his life. Now, let me just put in a parenthesis here. I've often wondered when I talk on these big shots whether it can cast a pall of discouragement as well as encouragement, because we all know that we're not a John Owen. Absolutely no way is anybody in this room, nobody, absolutely no exceptions, Dan Fuller or anybody, is going to be a John Owen and produce this quantity of work and have it last 300 and some years. So here we hold him up and you all go out, like this. Now here's the lesson. You can hear it coming. Charles Spurgeon and John Owen came into being by two people that history never even named. Okay, so we're not going to be John Owens. But I'll tell you, every Sunday I stand in this pulpit, I believe I might create one. Or something a little less. Or 1,000 a little less, or somewhere in there. And I'd be real happy if history forgot me and one person came out of my ministry like Billy Graham. There's another no name. Well, Billy Graham did remember that evangelist, but he was a nobody virtually in history. So don't hear all this as saying, I'll never be a John Owen, so why should I listen to all that stuff? There are all kinds of reasons to listen besides that, but I thought that was an encouraging one for me. Second thing that happened, conversion was number one. Second thing was marriage. To Mary Rook, married 31 years to this woman, and she died before he did. We know absolutely nothing about her, but this stunning fact. They had 11 children, and they all died. 10 of them in infancy or childhood. One daughter lived to marry as a young adult. The marriage broke up. She came home. She died of consumption. He outlived 11 children and a wife. That's one child born and dead every 3 years of his adult life. That's all we know. We don't hear one echo in his writings of that. Now that's what I call frustrating. That's when I want a diary. That's when I want to get inside his heart and say, how did you survive? Knowing what I know about what's coming in his life. When I read that fact years ago, I kind of put it over John Owen and said, anybody that just goes on ministering, losing a child every 3 years. I don't know if they all died that conveniently, spaced out, or whether I know 2 sons died in the 55 plague, 2 little boys. But how anybody just goes on ministering with glory, like you read in his latter-day works of meditations on the glory of Christ, something's going on in that man's heart I want to know about. Just with that fact alone, something is going on that I want to know about. Number 3 event that happened in those early years in London in his late 20s. The publishing of his first book. He lived just a few years after the big hubbub in Holland. between the Remonstrants, the Arminians, and the Calvinists, with the production of the 5 points, and then the Synod of Dort, and he studied all of that, and that was hot on his agenda, and so he wrote a book with this preface-like title, A Display of Arminianism, being a discovery of the old Pelagian idol free will with the new goddess contingency advancing themselves into the throne of God in heaven to the prejudice of His grace, providence, and supreme dominion over the children of men. That's the title of the book. And you don't need to read it. You know exactly what he thinks. Except that Owen is one of the most exegetical of the Puritans, and therefore if you care about biblical foundations, which you ought to do, then you will want to read that or another. So that launched him into his public career. He was now a controversialist and a well-known Puritan pastor. So the fourth thing that happened, that was the third, the fourth thing that happened in those days was he became a pastor. He got a little church, a small parish in Fordham, Essex. July 16, 1643, 27 years old, he gets his first parish. He had been making money by being chaplains and tutors until that time. Now that's important because he was a pastor all of his life, essentially. He's going to be more than that. But these books that you read here, most of them, I don't know if that's true, the practical ones anyway, came out of his pastoral preaching ministry. He was a pastor, especially the last 20 years of his life. Keep that in mind. He's not a professional theologian making money by teaching in a university. He is a pastor. And the fifth thing that happened in those days was the invitation to speak in Parliament. In 1646, he's now 30 years old, an extraordinary honor to be asked to address the House of Commons. There was no House of Lords in that period. And maybe there was. I'm thinking of another period. That's 1646. At any rate, he's addressing Parliament, and he was catapulted then not only into a controversialist role theologically, but a political role. And he was a political animal for the next 14 years. He was known in the political circles. Oliver Cromwell, the protector, the substitute for the king, during those 20 years or so, made John Owen his chaplain as he went up and slaughtered the Scots and went over and slaughtered the Irish. And he took along Cromwell to preach to his troops and to give theological justification for what he was doing, which Owen was happy to do. He believed very much that God's hand was on Oliver Cromwell and that what was happening against the Presbyterianism of England and the protectorate was of the devil, and therefore he interpreted all of those military victories as divine victories. And maybe they were. He even was asked to preach the day after Parliament executed Charles I. And he did. And he called it just retribution from God because of the sins of Charles I. So you can see how entangled this man was in the contemporary politics of his day. Then Cromwell made him the dean of Christ Church, Oxford. That's both a college and a cathedral. And from 1651 to 1660, he was the dean of this school. And about, 4 of those years, I believe, or 5, he was elevated also, simultaneously, to the vice-chancellorship of Oxford. Now, when I began to read this stuff about chaplain, military entanglements, speaking to Parliament, traveling to Scotland and Ireland, a dean of a school, a vice-chancellor of a university, I said, and this man is studying theology and writing the likes of the death of death in the death of Christ? When? When does he do that? The question I began to pose is,